John Edward, welcome to 1+1. When you were a kid growing up on Long Island, New York, which was your favourite TV show? I'll give you a choice.
Okay.
Was it Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, The Addams Family, or Doctor Who?
I have to say it was I Dream of Jeannie.
Really?
Yes, it was I Dream of Jeannie, to the point that I have now in my house 4 authentic Genie bottles that are actually decorative. It's amazing, like, if you're a fan of the show, it's like you can actually have an authentic bottle. They have ones from different seasons, and yep, I Dream of Jeannie would be the show.
What was it about that show that you really liked?
The powers. She had magical powers. And I was very intrigued as a child by anything that was powers related. The $6 Million Man, the Bionic Woman, anything that had ESP attached to it. Disney had a movie came out that was Escape from Witch Mountain, or Return to Witch Mountain. I remember that was something that I was intrigued by anything that had powers related to it.
And was that because you sensed in yourself that there was something there and you were trying to learn, or was that escapism?
I think part of it was I did identify with the coolness of, like, wow, I want to be that, but childlike, that was on TV at the time. So I think I identify with that. But my mom and dad didn't have a great relationship, and my dad had an alcohol problem. And there was some escapism when it came to television.
So your parents didn't have this great relationship.
No.
I understand that they did eventually split up.
They did.
How old were you when that happened?
12, 13?
12 or 13. But you knew long before that you had something in terms of seeing auras around people, maybe being able to transport yourself. Is that correct?
I did. I had these kind of imaginative moments. I had these moments that were really creative in my head, where I would explore what I was doing from a different perspective. Even though I was up and awake, I would have this different perspective, almost like I was like looking down on myself and what I was doing. And I had like some out-of-body experiences that I just didn't know what they were. My dreams were very active. I had a lot of night terrors. I had some experiences that I couldn't understand as a child. I would dream of a wolf quite often. Did
you ever realize what it was you were dreaming about?
No. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I had when my first book came out, I was doing a book tour, and I was somewhere in the Midwest of the United States. And we're talking like my childhood was plagued by seeing a wolf, like a lot. And I lived in a second-floor apartment in Queens, and my dad was a New York City police officer, and it's the only thing I could say that in life my mom didn't back up. I used to say, "Can you send Daddy in the room with his gun? There's a wolf in my room." And she would laugh and be like, "Go to bed. There's no wolves in Queens," And I remember as a child being paralyzed, like being up and like looking in the corner, and there it was. So years later, when I was doing a book signing, there was a shaman that came to the signing, and as he's standing there, and she like looked over, like this, like past me, and then looked at me and said, "Oh, I see you walk with the wolf in this life." And I was like, "What?" I completely became unprofessional. Everybody else in the line was like, "What?" I was like, You see it?" And he goes, "Of course." He goes, "This has been with you since you were a child. I've never met this person before, never." And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "It's your spirit animal. It's been with you. It's like protecting you." I was like, I wish somebody would have said this earlier, a lot of sleepless nights.
Your mother's family, who had Italian background, they were always into going to psychics and having paranormal stuff. So you grew up with it, and it was completely natural for you.
For my mom's side of the family, 100% normal.
Do you think that was a cause of conflict between your mum and your dad?
It was an absolute cause of conflict between my mom and my dad. I literally was not allowed to be around the subject matter. It was make sure my son is not connected to that stuff. It was that. My dad was a New York City police officer. He was a career military guy. He had no time for anything that was connected to that. He made him very uncomfortable. Then they separated. I moved into the house where all of this, paranormal activity was happening. But I had adopted more of my dad's philosophy. Like, this wasn't real.
When did it hit you that it could be real?
It hit me that it could be real when Lydia Clarke did my reading. When she came, she was one of the people that came to my grandmother's house.
Was she a famous psychic?
Not famous like TV's famous, but famous in the circle at that time in the 80s, that she had a very big, very, very, very well-known following. And she was part of an organization in Manhattan that if you did readings for this organization, It was kind of like the highbrow, and that was my turning point when I had a reading with her.
And what was it about her reading that was so mind-blowing, I guess? Was it mind-blowing?
In hindsight, it was mind-blowing. In the moment, I thought she was completely out of her mind. I was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school. She takes my high school ring and she does something called psychometry. And psychometry is where you hold on to a person's object. And you're basically reading the energy of the person from their object. She took it, she literally went down like this and started speaking. Didn't look at me, didn't ask me any questions. She just started. She said I had highly evolved beings of white and gold light that were ready to work with me. And I remember sitting there thinking like, oh my God, this woman is out of her mind. She might as well have said, hey, I have a TARDIS in the backyard. Let's go flying around the universe. I was like, okay. And the last part of the reading was where she talked about what was currently happening, and then she did offshoots of where things were going that she could not possibly have known. So I'm skeptical, but I'm not cynical. And I had to explore how, when those things happened, she knew it.
So at that time, after that reading, was it an instant kind of transformation for you, or did you sit on the information for a few years?
I remember being very uncomfortable after the reading. Like, I felt, the word I always use is violated. I felt violated. I didn't like it. I didn't like that she knew that. It was kind of like, ooh. It's like she was like peering into aspects of my life that was not okay. But I let her do it. I went to the public library and I was doing research on the subject matter, and it was there in that moment, sitting on the floor of the library, that I started to go, well, wait a minute, this is not psychic, this is normal. Like, we all from time to time see our dead relatives, right? Isn't this normal? And I remember asking a friend in high school, don't you see your grandfather? Like, he's like, well, when he comes over. I go, no, like, your grandfather that's passed, like, don't you see? And he went, no. I was like, you don't? And he goes, no. I go, you've never seen one of your dead relatives, like, just in a dream? He's like, no. Have you? And I was like, yeah, I actually have. So I started to kind of like look at things differently.
So knowing that knowledge and knowing that you saw things possibly a bit differently to the people around you, you tried, or you went into a few different professions. The one that amazes me is you were a phlebotomist, which is someone who draws blood in a hospital. I think you also did some ballroom dancing, which was how you met your wife.
Correct. I was more of a student, and she wasn't allowed. She was my teacher, and she technically wasn't allowed to fraternize with the students. So I wound up becoming a teacher. Why
did you go into the health services area? What was it about drawing blood that you found interesting?
So it wasn't exactly I wanted to be a phlebotomist. I knew I wanted to work in healthcare. I had a pull to healing, and I had a pull to healthcare. Wasn't sure if it was going to be hospital administration. Wasn't sure if I was going to be a doctor. And I thought maybe I'd become a cardiac pump perfusionist. Maybe I'll be a PA. I knew I wanted to be in there in some realm. So I decided to go more administrative. Healthcare administration was what my degree's in. And at a certain point, I knew I was going to need clinical hours. And I did it for a couple of years.
And were you doing that as well as doing psychic readings for people?
Yes, I was. I had two different identities. It was like Clark Kent and Superman. I had, by day I was, student and phlebotomist, and then by night I was the psychic. Two different worlds.
I just want to go back to something. Knowing that you have two children, would you encourage them in their psychic abilities?
I would, but not in the way that I've done it. So I encourage everybody, whether they're my kids or clients, I want everybody to explore the world of energy and to understand intuition, but to understand it from a practical, looking at life through a lens of metaphysics. So not to do readings for other people, like I wouldn't encourage my kids to do readings for other people. If they're supposed to do this, then it'll happen in the way that it's supposed to happen. But if they're supposed to be an engineer and an actor, I want them to be an intuitive engineer and an intuitive actor. Like, I want them to be it. I don't want them to do it.
So you had these two identities, as you were explaining. What would have been the moment when you were suddenly thrust into more international fame? Was it after you wrote your first book?
I had no intention of doing this as my career. This was not something that I still struggle when people ask me if they don't know what I do. When they say, if they don't know who I am and they go, what do you do? I say I'm a writer. It's just easier. When they go, oh, what do you write about? I go, parapsychology and metaphysics. And they're usually too intimidated to go, what is that? And then if only once or twice have people turn around and go, oh, like psychic stuff? And I'm like, yes. But I really did have two different worlds. And I had, somebody found out where I was working, and they started to call the hospital, and they wanted to know if on my lunch hour I would be able to do a reading for them. And I was scheduled for a really big raise and title change, and it was promised. It was this whole big deal. And it was like, any day now, it's coming, any day now. So the vice president of the department called me into his office, and Mr. Psychic is thinking like, here comes my big bonus and my raise. And I looked at him, I was like, yes. And he goes, so what's this talking to the dead thing? He goes, well, Marie's getting a lot of phone calls to the general switchboard, and people are looking for you to make connections with their dead loved ones if you have time. And it was a Catholic hospital. So I was like, listen, can I come back at 5:30 and have this conversation with you? And he went, sure. So I went to my office, I sat in my office, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get fired. What do I do? So I literally meditated, I looked up and I went, I don't care who you have to get for me, but get one of his dead relatives to show up at 5 o'clock when I go back in his office. And I walked back into his office, and I said to him, Marty, I could either tell you what I do, or I can demonstrate it. And he went, go ahead. And I read him. And I'll never forget it, he sat there. I was over there, he just sat there like this, looking straight ahead. And I went, so that's pretty much what people are seeking out for me. I do this in my spare time, it doesn't affect my job, I don't, they did the whole thing. And he said, and I quote, you just eradicated 40 years of a belief system in 20 minutes. And then I was paranoid, so the next morning I got there extra early. And he walked in, and he walked past my office, and he looked in, and he smiled, and he went, why are you here? And he didn't have to say another word. It was like, why are you doing what you're doing when you can be doing what you did? It was that moment. So I made a universal statement to my wife that if that bonus and raise didn't come through, I would leave my job and do this professionally. And they did not come through with what it was that was promised to me. And I went, oh my God, they're totally calling me on this. And I gave them 10 weeks notice, and that's how I left my job.
So you found your calling, I guess you'd say, when you were in your mid-20s. I want to talk a little bit about what you do. You've said that you act as a bridge. I think this is a quote from your book. I go between the physical world and the non-physical world. I go to the other side, I get information, and I bring it out.
Correct.
For those of us who have no idea, how do you go to the other side?
I don't technically go, but I act as the bridge, the conduit between both. So I feel like I'm the facilitator, I'm the bridge. I act as the interpreter of information, and I explain what I'm seeing, hearing, and feeling in my frame of reference from those who are on the other side, spirit world, hereafter, heaven, however you want to call it, to the people that are still here.
Well, isn't somebody Thomas Michael?
Oh my God.
So you're talking about?
That's that's our godson. That's his nephew.
What's the chair over there that's all by itself?
That's where my dad used to sit.
So you were trying to figure out, I wish I would have had that pact with him, I wish I would have said this, I wish I would have done that, but you did it after he passed.
I did.
He's now giving it to you. He's now telling me that you guys had this.
Oh, Daddy. Oh.
You deal with a lot of people who are in a state of grief. And I wonder, is the reason for that? Because in our society, grief is kind of taboo. You're expected to kind of get over things and show a happy face pretty soon after something has happened. Would you agree with that?
I do. And I talk about grief like it's the big, 800-pound gorilla in the room. Because it is, and I tell people all the time, grief is patient. It's really patient. It waits for you. It just waits. So I am a big proponent of talking about things that make people uncomfortable when it comes to loss, about your feelings, about what people are really afraid of. And people say that they're looking for connection, and that's what they're looking for. But a lot of people will say, oh, I'm looking for closure. I'm like, no, you're not looking for closure, because closure is saying that you want to put an end to it. What you're looking for is the communication. You're looking for the continuation. So what we want to do is honor what we're feeling, not what we're fearing. And usually it's the fear of not being able to see them again, the fear of that there is nothing else, the fear that we're not going to be able to connect. But even when you have a belief system, even when you know there's something else, you still have to honor how you're feeling about the loss of the person. When my grandmother passed, I was a hot mess. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember one of my cousins being really like sarcastic outside the church and said, "Dude, don't you know she's okay?" I go, "Oh, I know she's fine. And I know she's now with my mom. And I know she's with her husband. And I know she's with family." I go, "But I'm not okay, because the only other person on this planet who was going to love me unconditionally just died." I go, "So I'm really sad, and I'm going to honor that, and I don't really care." And I think it's really important to go to that place of, wow, this really sucks. Like, this is really bad. This is not what I want to feel. But own it and feel it and wear it like a badge.
Why is it that a lot of the responses once you've gone to the other side are that person who you say has passed saying, "I'm okay"? I mean, it's rare that anyone says, "I'm in purgatory, get me out of here."
Yeah, exactly. Nobody says it's really hot here. You know, like, "Oh my God, there's a guy with a pitchfork poking at me." I think it's the number one thing that people want to know from me. The reality is that the last thing that we experience with them is their physical passing. And that's usually a person who's laboring to leave on some level, whether it be illness or an event or whatever it might be. But we labor to come into this world, we're going to labor to leave. But it's a negative experience for those that are left behind, but it's their birth back home. It's their birth back to that place, the other side, whatever you want to call it. It's a sad thing. So the number one thing that they want to kind of let us know is that after this bad negative thing that we call death, which is really a transition in anything metaphysical speaking, whether it be the tarot, astrology, numerology, death is just transitory. It's just a transition. It means change. It's a metamorphosis. It's the consciousness leaving the body. This is the vessel, the soul is the driver, the car is the body. They want to let us know, like, "Oh my God, we're still here. Like, I still love you. We're still connected. You're just in a different form." But that's the "we're okay" feeling. It's more of it's a feeling rather than "I'm okay."
It's okay. She's seeing this as her way of coming through. She's absolutely fine, and she's thanking me for getting this across to you first.
Now, the vast majority of people that I know who visited psychics, it'd be fair to say that they're middle-aged, professional women, quite capable of being cynical and skeptical about a range of things, and yet they're facing some kind of crisis in their lives. Would that be a fair assessment? Do you notice that many of your clients are in that group of people and women?
I think the majority of my clientele has always been women. Vast ages, not just in that category. I think it's changing. I think I have had in the last decade, there's been more men that are coming, because I think people are becoming more open-minded. I will say I find men easier to read, believe it or not, than women. Women are more open to it. Men are more logical. Women are more emotional. I read more cerebral. So I think for me, it's an easier reading to do. But I think women are more open to it because they trust their own intuition a lot more and their own feelings.
Now, I have to declare to you that being a journalist, I suppose all through my career, I've had to deal with issues that I have to be able to prove that they are true. And
Right.
I suppose cynicism is something that comes pretty naturally to me. You've obviously had a lot of this reaction. People have been critical of you and trying to undermine what you do and try to pick apart your act as well as your teachings and your books. I wonder, how do you deal with that? Because that in itself must be quite confronting.
You know what the real honest answer? I don't really care. It's the thick-skinned thing that you have to have when you make the choice to do this. Once I wound up doing books and doing radio and then doing TV, it became something that I was like, "Oh wow, that was mean. Like, wow, that was like a mean statement." And then I recognized, well, wait a second, let's back up. You were kind of like that person. You were that person making fun of the people coming to your grandmother's house. So what do you say to yourself now? So when I look back on that, I go, well, I was coming from a place of not understanding what it was that existed. Then the flip opposite, because I'm a Libra, so I can do that. The flip opposite of me was going, well, wait a minute. Some of those people that came to your grandmother's house were totally full of, BS, because you could pick apart their readings. And so I was going, I had this duality of it, and I never lost it. I kept it. I've kept it 30 years into doing this.
John, have you ever felt exploitative or manipulative?
Never. Never. Absolutely never.
So even when you see people are grieving, you don't feel that in some way that you're being too invasive, intrusive?
Absolutely not. Well, one of the first things I'll tell people is if you're in that need of a reading, like if somebody's in dire, like, I need a reading, it's going to fix me, I actually tell them that a medium is not what they need. They need a counselor. A medium is not a therapist. And a reading is no means, in any shape or form, should be looked at as therapy. I think it could be very helpful, and it could show that there is something else. But I think the person has to honor that journey of their grief. Absolutely, 100%. And I could say that from personal experience. Like, when I lost my mom, I was 19. That was a really pivotal moment for me. My work shifted as a result of that. And it wasn't like having readings, like people reading me, that helped me. It was actually doing them for complete strangers and seeing that validation that helped me on my journey.
Your industry, though, there is a proportion of people that are out to perhaps scam and manipulate people. How do you, if you have to anyway, how do you convince people that that is not the type of work that you deal with?
I don't try. I think it's important, and people don't really understand when I say this. I think it's important for people to poke holes. I think it's important for people to be skeptical. I think it's important for people to ask the questions. I think it's important for people to start the dialogue. I don't think it's okay for people to do those things and character assassinate. That I have a problem with. Like when somebody tries to assess my motivation, or they try to tell me why I do what I do, or they just make accusatory statements like fraud, con man, biggest douche of the universe, you name it, you say it, you call it. I mean, it is what it is. It's like, and I just go, okay, I've never ever attacked somebody who's an atheist or agnostic or a cynic. I've never attacked them for not having a belief system. I've never called them a name. I've never said, oh, you're this, I just like, okay, if you don't believe it, it's okay.
Do you feel the burden of your responsibility?
It's funny you should say that. I do. I actually feel not just for me, but for the subject matter. When I see a lot of what's on TV, and I see a lot of the way the subject matter is sometimes portrayed, it makes me very uncomfortable.
Can you give me an example? Are you talking like shows like The Mentalist or something like that?
No,
or?
A scripted show I'm okay with. I'm okay with shows that are scripted because I think we can be forgiving with shows like that. But
so you mean reality type shows?
I have a problem with that. I do. I think that when things are overly produced, it skews what the reality of something could be. And when we did Crossing Over, I was a nightmare for TV people to work with. They did not enjoy their experience working with me because I didn't allow anything to be edited out of sequence. They couldn't, things had to be put together in a certain way so that it was real. And I would say to them, I go, listen, you have 200 people sitting in a room. They know what happened. You have to be realistic. Like, you can't go produce something that's not what their experience was.
I have some friends who lost a brother in the Bali bombings, and that was when they started to reach out and go to psychic readings for the first time. Is there a difference when someone dies in a sudden and tragic, very tragic way?
I think there's a difference for the family because they themselves put themselves in that moment. But do I think there's a difference for the person who's passed? No.
Really?
No, I think it's their passing. I think that there's more of an impact on the people left behind because of the way that the person passes, the suddenness of it. But I think that if you were to ask a person who lost somebody in a car accident on a street in Sydney, they would feel the same exact way that the person in the bombing was. They just maybe didn't get as much attention.
Many individuals, including the illusionist Harry Houdini, have worked to out fakery in a sense. A lot of competitions around, people are getting huge rewards if psychic or paranormal observations can be proven. Have you ever entered any of these?
No. Because I look at the intention. I went to the University of Arizona. They were studying it. They wanted to study the subject matter. There was no reward in it. There was no financial anything in it. It was basically, hey, we're going to do this and it's going to be documented. That I did. That was to me something that I felt like I can do and I can explore. But I would never put myself in a position where the intention is something that's, like, hey, here's $1 million challenge, or like here's this or here's that. It's not my thing.
I often ask people on this program if they have an idea about their legacy, but of course I don't really have to ask you that because you probably already know what's in your future, don't you?
You know, I don't. I hope that I've left this world a better place than I found it. I really hope that being here, I make a difference, and I hope that when people think about my name, it's something that's positive, that they understand my intentions, and that they go, oh, he was passionate about letting people know that this is real, and now he's met up with his family on the other side. I hope I leave my family better than I find them. I hope that, you know, my kids, my grandchildren will mourn the physical loss of me, but yet know that I'm still connected to them in some way. That to me would be the greatest legacy, more than anything.
Obviously, when you were starting out so many years ago, you didn't imagine that you were going to become as
No.
famous as you are, with a huge empire, if you like. And obviously you've done, well, I guess it is, you know, you've had the
An
TV
empire.
shows, you've got the live stage shows, you've got your internet channel virtually, and you've obviously done very well for yourself financially. Was that ever important to you?
The celebrity part of it? No, not at all. The financial part of it was always a worry and concern because I never wanted to have to do this for a living. I hate to say it like this, but I had a real job. Like, I had a real career. Like, that to me is what I was supposed to be doing. But I think in reality, that was the boundary I put in myself, because that's what you're supposed to do. You know, you're supposed to have a real job and you have your IRA and your whole 9 yards. And then this is what I did because I could. So when this became my profession, it was an uncomfortable transition for me. Now I look at it as, this is what I do for a living, and people pay me for what I do. And I have no problem with that, because you can't pay me for what I do. You can pay me for my time. And that's how I look at it.
John Edward, it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking with me on 1+1.
I appreciate it.